Nell's foot caught on the hem, and the locket slammed open against the marble, metal striking the floor with a sound that stopped the orchestra. Fear tightened her fingers around the clutch before she reached for the chain. She tried to cover the small oval with one hand and keep standing. Around her, forks paused mid-air and conversations died. A dozen phones lifted toward the dais. The banquet chair Lady Margaret blinked once and said, "Someone help Miss Avery." Within 3 sentences the problem was visible. The locket was not just jewelry. Inside, a tiny photograph and a folded slip named the Avery estate's last donor. If anyone saw the contents closely, Nell could lose a fragile promise she had come to protect. She had come to the banquet to secure a single signature that would keep the Avery house from being sold, and now a private object lay exposed in public. Fear pushed her forward, and she stumbled into the arms of Alexander Carrington as the heel of her shoe skidded. Alexander steadied her with both hands at the waist. He smelled of cedar and a faint smoke that made her groggy in a way that had nothing to do with the room's champagne. He didn't smile. He scanned the room with the precision of a man who measured danger by who noticed Etelina, he said once. Using her full name, as if to slow the rumor, "Hold my arm," his baritone drew the attention that might otherwise have picked over the locket's contents. Nell felt his palm's firm, warm settle, a small space between her and the thousands of eyes in the hall. She forced her knees to stop shaking. Alexander, she managed. The name tasted like a rehearsal. She had not expected him to be here tonight in any role but a headline. She had expected instead to bargain at a small table with a solicitor and leave before dessert. She had rehearsed how to ask Lady Margaret for time, how to plead a stain of loss into a business case. Now she had the opposite problem, exposure. The problem was concrete and urgent. If a donor withdrew, the foundation's lead gift would vanish and the council would schedule the sale of her family's house within 30 days. That was the transaction she had tried to prevent with a list of modest promises, a folding plan, and one fragile photograph in a locket. A waiter came forward. "Careful and practiced, Miss Avery. Shall I?" Lady Margaret cut him off with a hand. "No, Thomas. Give them space." Lady Margaret stepped forward. Her voice low enough to be private but sharp enough to slice the room's curiosity. "Elena, come this way." Thomas Hale, Alexander's aide, appeared at Alexander's elbow and kept his glance on the cluster of glossy attendees. "The press, Thomas." His voice carried a tension like an instrument string. Alexander moved with the decision of someone who had rehearsed interruptions. He guided Nell toward the balcony instead of letting Lady Margaret curtsy her away. "Not there," he said. "He will take her." Thomas fell into step, blocking a flash. Their path cut through an invisible line in the room between spectacle and discretion. On the balcony, the city lights spread like a rule of distances. For the first time since the stumble, Nell could feel her breath. She pressed the locket into her palm and kept the photograph hidden. Fear eased into a small relief when Alexander tightened his grip to steady her stance against the balcony's stone. "What happened?" "Alexander." His attention did not leave her face. He used short sentences that read like instructions. "Are you hurt?" "No, Nell." She let her fingers search for the photograph and counted the seconds aloud to herself, as if counting would anchor Herritt's the locket. It opened. Inside she swallowed and did not finish. He watched the chain between her fingers. "Show me." He did not ask for permission in the way a partner would. He asked like a man removing an obstruction. Nell hesitated and then turned the pendant so only he could see. The picture was of her mother and a younger man in front of a low brick house. The folded slip had a note in cramped script, "For preservation, not sale." Alexander's face changed minutely, without announcement. The crease between his brows softened a fraction. He shifted his stance and reached for the chain, touched the photograph, then drew his hand back as if the image had warmth. "Who signed that?" He asked. It was a pledge from a donor who promised to hold their name anonymous until the charity's goal was reached, Nell answered. Her voice tightened. She spoke quickly, To preempt speculation if the name leaks, if anyone from the head table sees that note, then the donor will withdraw. Lady Margaret saw herself. They heard a laugh from below, a sharp edge that sounded like someone testing the air for scandal. Alexander, is that Miss Avery? Marina Voss called from a head table, the words carrying clearly. Marina's tone threaded rumor and warning. He did not expect her here tonight. The comment pulled a ripple of attention back up toward the balcony. Nell flinched. Marina Voss, she said, she can be difficult. She kept her eyes on Alexander. Stay here until I handle this, Alexander. The command contained a promise and an instruction both. He descended the stairs with Thomas at his heel and Lady Margaret stepping aside to let him through. Nell watched him move as if watching a tactic on a chessboard, the motion efficient, measured, a man comfortable, transforming private choice into public statement. Back on the floor, Marina rose halfway from her seat and dropped a line that was not quite a question. Lady Margaret, who is that with Alexander? That is Elena Avery. Lady Margaret replied with a quiet firmness. She is a guest and a former supporter of the charity. Marina's chin tilted. Hope no one here is unaware of what a public association can do to a donor's confidence. Her words were thin and deliberate. A bank of phones rose as guests began to murmur. Somewhere near the photographer's area, a shutter clicked. Alexander allowed the photograph to form the story he wanted. He stepped between Nell and the head table, his hand pressing at the small of her back. Elena is a guest this evening. We will return to our seats, he said, loud enough for the cameras, but without the flourish of someone posing. He moved them closer to the side entrance and toward Thomas, who kept an eye on the press. The photographer who had taken the shot was named Martin Cole. He had a habit of favoring decisive frames. He framed Alexander shielding Nell, the line of his body cutting off the head table. The camera's focus made the private gesture look like a claim. Martin's assistant whispered, "This will run by midnight." Martin did not bother to hide a small, satisfied smile. Back by the dais, Marina inspected the image on a phone as if that could prove motive. Lady Margaret, perhaps we should consider whether Miss Avery's cause is compatible with our donor list, she said. Her voice suggested action, threats, not subtlety. Lady Margaret's jaw tightened. Marina, this charity stands on the merits of its work. We will not be bullied by rumor. She spoke in clear, rehearsed sentences designed to calm. Yet Nell heard the small hitch in her breath. Lady Margaret's role as chair required balancing donors against need, and Nell's shaky place in that balance could be tipped by one signature. The stakes had not been abstract for weeks. They were a ledger with a deadline. Now the ledger had a smear on it. Outside the hall, thunder rolled distant enough to be a punctuation, not weather. Alexander returned to the balcony in 5 minutes. They called it a photograph of protection. Thomas quietly, handing Alexander a folded napkin. Martin already sent it to his editor. Thomas Pace Quickenidzer. Marina's people have been checking names. If she pushes donors to withdraw, Lady Margaret will have to choose. Alexander glanced at Nell. What did you say to Lady Margaret? He asked. Edie told her I was asking for time to find the legal paperwork from my mother's estate. Nell replied. He said we had a pledge to hold. I begged a signature for an escrow. Alexander's fingers brushed hers as he took the napkin. He folded it and placed it in his jacket pocket, a small motion that looked like habit and felt like custard. I give me the paperwork tomorrow morning. He said he will ensure it is reviewed. He did not promise money. He promised an action tied to time and a place in his schedule. That detail mattered. Nell felt relief come like air from a sealed jar. She realized her hands had been holding their own trimmer. Then doubt arrived. What did Alexander gain by intervening? Was he protecting her from a private kindness or making a public claim to control the narrative? She saw donors glancing at phones and Leo Voss smug leaning back at the table. Doubt tightened her stomach as if unrest had a taste. The room shifted again. Marina rose fully and called for a toast in a voice that suggested triumph to protective associations, she said, and her guests laughed thinly. The laughter landed like pebbles. Lady Margaret lifted her glass more slowly than usual, eyes flicking to Alexander once, then away to the charity, she said, and the room obliged. After the toast, Alexander escorted Nell through service corridors where the staff moved with nervy efficiency. A caterer stepped aside to let them pass and murmured, "Sir, I'll make sure Miss Avery's coat is in the cloakroom." Thomas kept one eye on the door that led back into the hall. They emerged near the grand piano, where the empty hall lay thick with chairs in exhaust. The lights had been lowered. Someone had left a single white rose across the piano's lacquer, its stem glistening with condensation from a tray left nearby. The sight struck both of them as a symbol, even though neither spoke the word. Nell. Alexander softly, careful now to lower his public voice into something private. He studied the locket again. "Who is the donor?" She closed her fist around the chain. "He don't know the name." The note said anonymous, but Lady Margaret promised to keep the commitment. If the donor withdraws, the council will not postpone a sale without a new guarantee. Alexander considered the piano and the rose. He took the rose and laid it gently across the photograph in the locket. A gesture more precise than romantici. "Will contact Lady Margaret tomorrow at 9. He said he will ask to see the pledge. I will not let a rumor decide this by midnight." He paused and added, "I will also speak to Martin Cole." The last clause landed like an admission of how much control he could exert. Nell's relief and doubt wrestled. Relief because someone with resources had intervened. Doubt because intervention often carried conditions. "Why would you do that, Alexander?" She asked. "Because I saw you trip, and the way your hands tried to hide something that mattered," he said. He kept his sentences short. He did not want to watch people pick through it. He did not explain further. Their exchange was interrupted by a new sound, the ping of a phone and a soft murmur from the corridor where a staff member checked a message. Thomas' expression shifted. "Sir, Marina has already messaged Lady Margaret saying she'll withhold funding if Miss Avery remains publicly associated with this event." He reported Lady Margaret's face as "She will answer in 5 minutes." Thomas' words pulled the room back into politics. Lady Margaret marched out of the hall with precise steps and a breath that looked like it had been measured. She went directly to Alexander with 13 guests' attention trailing her like a wake. "Alexander, they called it a claim," she said without raising her voice. "If Marina pulls her funding, we lose the lead donor, then we adjust the lead donor," Alexander replied. His voice was calm and finite. "Tell me which donors are wavering, and I will speak to them personally." "You can't simply do that. Lady Margaret have protocols." "We have a board, then use me to work within those protocols, Alexander." He placed his hand on the back of a chair, as if steadying. "The Rumelina's family has done work in the community." She came with a documented pledge. "We will verify it," he added. "Lady Margaret, you will not let a rumor decide an estate's future." Tonight there were murmurs. Marina's smile tightened. Thomas watched the head table like a hawk looking for the next move. The photographers returned to their work, but Martin Cole already had the frame he wanted. He had circled back to the press pit and uploaded the image for midnight distribution. Outside the hall, doors opened to a small garden where the valet had left a single delivery van. Alexander stepped out for a moment to make a call. Nell watched him through the glass and felt both gratitude and a new unease. He made the call with a steady voice and spoke names: board members, donor representatives, legal counsel. When he returned, his face had the same measured look, but with an additional line around the eyes from work. He had just done a "They will not withdraw tonight." He said he have secured a hearing tomorrow morning. Lady Margaret agreed. The donor will be contacted under the charity's confidentiality protocol instead of a public announcement. Nell tried to keep her gratitude small enough to match what she could repay. "Thank you," she said. Her hand brushed his sleeve as she passed him a folded copy of the pledge she had clutched in a secret pocket. "This is all I had to show." She tried to explain that the photograph had been her mother's, that the pledge had been written in her handwriting, that the house had rooms of books and an attic where dust made maps of light. She stopped herself from spilling more personal details. She did not want her plea to be sentiment to be used against her. He took the paper and scanned it with a glance. "Leave it with Thomas," he instructed. Nodding toward his aide, "Thomas will bring it to my office tonight, and we'll have legal review before morning." Thomas bowed his head once and took the document. The empty hall felt larger now, the audience dispersed or still in pockets at the edges. The piano reflected a pale line of light. Nell moved toward it and lifted the cover to test how the ivory felt under her fingers. The keys were cool, slightly damp from the air. She didn't play. She simply let her fingertips rest on the first 3 keys as if to verify they were real. In the foyer, a young caterer named Jonas approached with a tray. "Miss Avery, someone left your shawl with the cloakroom," he said, "and there's a message. Martin's photo went out. People are talking downstairs." Jonas' practical report was an external event that shifted the ground beneath them again. Nell's throat tightened. She thought of the worst-case ledger, Donna withdrawn, council meets, sale scheduled. She imagined a solicitor stamping papers, and the house listed. A hard resolve formed. She would not let the house be taken because speakers in a room decided it was scandalous. Alexander watched her set her jaw. "What do you want me to do tomorrow?" he asked. He was asking not for permission, but to map action. "Be in the meeting room at 9. She said, "Ask to see the pledge in full and the Donna's file. If it's missing, call the council and refuse to accept any revocation without proof. Demand documentation." He nodded. Will the finality of his nod suggested both a shield and an intervention that might cost him influence among Donnas. It also suggested that he had a stake in being seen beside her tonight for reasons that were not yet clear to Nell. They walked back through the dimmed hall together, side by side though not touching. The press had begun to circulate the photograph. Voices in the foyer speculated. Marina spoke loudly into a phone, and the cadence of her sentences suggested she was preparing a next move. Thomas walked ahead with the file, and Lady Margaret lingered at the doorway, lit by the hall's amber lights. She nothing as she watched them pass. Hours later, as the chandeliers dimmed and the last guests left in carriages, Nell and Alexander found themselves standing beside the grand piano alone. He handed her a small folded card with his office number printed plainly across it, and in the same motion he placed a single white rose onto the piano's closed lid. The rose lay next to the photograph inside the locket when she opened it to check again. She felt a shift in emotion, first fear, then relief, then a fresh doubt, and then a small, stubborn hope that was practical rather than poetic. Hope that someone would keep their word tomorrow when the city tested them. Nell folded the card into her palm. "Alexander," she said, naming him to make sure the sound would not disappear in the empty room. "Why did you help me?" He looked at the piano keys, then back at her. "Because you needed a witness who could act." He said, "Because I did not want a private thing crushed by rumor." She tucked the locket close to her throat and slid his card into her clutch. A door at the far end of the hall clicked as staff locked the service entrance. Outside, a delivery van's engine idled and then rolled away. The small noises felt like decisions closing. Nell's choices were now concrete: keep the pledge safe, appear at a meeting with supporting documents, and face Donnas who might prefer scandal-free headlines to messy truth. Alexander had chosen to make a public gesture. Marion had chosen to threaten funding. Lady Margaret had chosen to mediate. Those choices would force actions in daylight. As they turned to leave, the piano's lacquer caught the rim of the chandelier and threw it back in a thin line. Nell placed the white rose across the photograph one more time and let her fingers linger on the metal edge of the locket. The chapter closed on a simple, visible action. She slid Alexander's card between the locket and the photograph and shut the pendant. The click echoed, precise and final in the dim hall. A camera flash cracked against the balcony wall as Nell stumbled backward, the light searing the marble and the moment into sharp edges. Fear tightened her fingers around the clutch. She could feel the heel of her shoe scrape along the terrace lip. She heard the orchestra stop somewhere inside, the same halted chord that had followed the locket's fall earlier in the evening. And she knew one photograph could turn her night's accident into a headline. The stakes were immediate. A blurred image of her leaning on a stranger threatened the charity, her mother's name, and the fragile goodwill that paid trustees' salaries. Nell pressed her back against the cold plaster and looked for a door. She kept her other hand over the locket that hung at her throat. She touched metal, then skin, as if confirming the chain was still there. Fear shifted into suspicion when she saw the shape of a man step onto the balcony next to her. Shoulders squared as if he belonged to the building rather than the banquet. She did not recognize him at first. Then she felt a cloak drop over her shoulders and heard Miss Avery pronounced with careful cadence. She blinked against the afterimage of the flash and met Alexander Carrington's steel blue gaze. Nell felt the next emotion, surprise, unravel physically. Her knees slackened, a breath escaped. Alexander did not fumble. He held the cloak like an offering and did not step back from the photographer's line of sight. She smelled cedar and bergamot and something faint like old smoke, and that scent made her think of the photograph she kept in her own pocket, the same angle as the miniature inside her locket. The coincidence tightened a knot in her chest. Someone outside the balcony, voice raised, "What is going on out there?" A security chief's boot scuffed the stone. The event manager's voice followed, brisk and loud, "Miss Avery, please come inside." Now the words landed like orders and pushed Nell toward action. She flattened the clutch against her stomach and stepped after Alexander, because it was the only immediate route away from the cameras. Her hands trembled when she did it. Inside the corridor, the pressed distant shutter taps sounded like a countdown. How did she get out here? The event manager demanded explain. Now Lady Beatrice's voice cut across the corridor. She had crossed the room with a speed that betrayed more than irritation. "This is a charity banquet, Mr. Carrington. We cannot have rumors. We have donors watching. We have trustees." Her tone clipped, practiced. Nell heard Julian say, "Alexander, your endorsement matters. This must be handled." The name dropped into the scene like a lever pulled. Nell's fear shifted into a guarded defiance. She lifted her chin and said, "I slipped, Lady Beatrice. Her voice tightened. Me locket caught on the hem." The locket was small and oval and hot under her fingers. She did not know how to make it sound anything other than an accident, and she watched faces folding the accident into other shapes. Marcus, Alexander's assistant, moved with the efficiency of someone used to smoothing edges. He walked to the balcony entrance, blocking sightliness. "Call the photographer over." Marcus ordered. No, Marcus' voice was not a question. The photographer hesitated, camera poised like a weapon. "Sir," he said to Alexander, "that shot will sell." "That model." Alexander cut him off with one look. "Marcus will take care of this." He stepped closer to Nell in a way that put his body between her and the corridor. The action changed the group's dynamic immediately. Two trustees went quiet, recalculating. "Lady Beatrice, Mr. Carrington, explain your connection to Miss Avery." Publicly, the word "publicly" landed with the force of a legal warning. Nell felt something else, shame. It arrived not as a speech, but as a physical heat along her neck. She touched the locket instinctively, and because she had to explain, she opened it. A small photograph stared up at Alexander, the same face he kept in his own wallet. She recognized by cadence and tilt and the crease of a smile. For a moment neither of them breathed. Alexander's hand tightened on his cloak. The corridor filled with the sound of people rearranging themselves. Julian stepped forward next to Lady Beatrice and said, "This will destroy tonight. Tell us one narrative." Alexander, he looked at Alexander with a look that was both calculation and threat. "We need a version that preserves the donor table." The trustees' murmurs swelled like a tide. Nell's pulse hammered faster. Her attempt to deflect with a small, true sentence faltered. "My photograph is of my sister." I carried it after she died. The words were too precise and too private. Alexander's jaw moved. He did not answer immediately. Marcus brought the photographer up close, whispering. The photographer's lens reflected the corridor lights in a thin, greedy line. Lady Beatrice's hand hovered near her purse, a small gesture that suggested readiness. To make a call, Miss Avery, she said. We will need an official statement. The trustees insist. The pressure mounted into a new emotion inside Nell, outrage. It wasn't an abstract feeling. It was a decision that rose in her throat. She straightened. He will not be stage, she said. He slipped. I was startled. That is the truth. Her words were quick, brittle. The room tightened around her. Alexander's response was not a statement but a choice. He stepped forward and announced, Eleanor Avery is my companion tonight. The corridor went still. Tabloid shutters outside clicked a new rhythm, then grew louder. Lady Beatrice's face went white with controlled fury. Alexander, she began. You cannot, Julian barked. You can't risk the charity for a personal story. The trustees' color changed, as if they were reading loss on a ledger. The public claim created a split second of relief for Nell, and then new danger. Relief washed through her chest because a powerful man had declared a public shield. But the relief turned into a flush of fear that she would be tied to someone else's reputation. She had wanted to protect her family's name. Now she was a visible part of another man's profile. The cameras outside found them instantly, and someone in the crowd shouted, Is she his mistress? The word hit like a thrown stone. Alexander's voice remained measured. No, then what? Lady Beatrice demanded. She is with me tonight. He did not elaborate. He did not smile. He did not look at the trustees for consent. The word withdrew a definitive line in the corridor. His choice to step forward had shifted the power. The trustees had to decide whether to salvage the event or cut it. Security crowded closer, voices clipped into commands. A tabloid editor's voice rose at the balcony's threshold. Statement or no statement, the shot's already out. Who will we quote? The editor's tone was hungry, expecting names to fuel pages. Marcus answered, All media inquiries go through Carrington. Prue. The line pushed the photographers back enough to stop immediate intrusion. Nell felt her stomach drop into a new emotion, uncertainty. She looked at Alexander and asked, Why would you do that? Her voice was small. He held her gaze and folded his hands the way he did when listening, a tiny, deliberate pause before he spoke. Because it would have been worse if I did nothing. He said, Because you should not be left to flail under a rumor tonight. Miss Avery, she had questions, and those questions sounded like accusations when she said them. Alexander, we barely know each other. The sentence landed between them. You don't have to protect me. It was not a protest about pride. It was an attempt to define boundaries. He adjusted his cufflinks the way he did when uneasy and said, I can choose to protect you and accept whatever consequence follows. Lady Beatrice's lips were a thin line. This is not a private matter any longer. She said, The trustees demand a public cover story. Julian, make a suggestion. Now Julian's suggestion came clipped and efficient. We say Miss Avery slipped and Mr. Carrington escorted her to recovery. Brief, factual, limited. No details. The trustees inclined toward containment, damage control as arithmetic. Nell had another thought that pushed through. Expose. A sharp idea that if she offered a short, human explanation now, they could control the narrative. She'll say I slipped and Mr. Carrington gave me his cloak. He then escorted me back in. That is true. Her voice gained steadiness as she chose to shape the story she would tell. The room responded to that action with a new calculation. Lady Beatrice looked between Alexander and Nell as if weighing coins. Marcus moved again. Fast and practical. Security will escort Miss Avery back into the main room. Mr. Carrington will offer a statement at the foot of the staircase. Cameras will be managed. Nell felt relief as a thin, brittle thread. She also felt exposed. Outside the balcony, the night air had cooled the dressing of the city, and the press clustered like moths. She could hear the muffled demands. One line, make it short. The logistics of a public lie condensed into a series of orders. They moved. Security walked them toward the staircase where the cameras were waiting. As they emerged into the gallery, a tabloid editor thrust a microphone near them and demanded, "Mitha Carrington, is Miss Avery your date?" Her voice had an edge of accusation. Alexander's answer was a controlled, deliberate sentence. Miss Avery slipped. "I offered cover and escorted her away from the photographers." The line landed with the measured tone of someone reading a prepared paragraph, but it did not satisfy Lady Beatrice. We will issue a joint statement from the charity. Miss Avery, you will sign off on it." Nell's fear shifted into decision. She would sign the statement, but she refused to be staged. She looked at Alexander and said, "I will sign, but I will not rehearse a life I don't have." Her voice cut through the corridor convulsions. He watched her with a crease between his brows. "Nor do I ask you to." He said, "You will tell the truth." We agreed on a new external event occurred. A photographer pushed forward and said, "Excuse me, Miss Carrington, hold her arm. We need a shot." The demand was transactional. Alexander placed his palm lightly on Nell's elbow and guided her forward. He did not tighten his grip. The contact sent a small electric pulse through both of them, neither romance nor comfort yet, but the physics of proximity altered their relationship. They reached the foot of the grand staircase and posed for the cameras in the way that the wealthy learned to pose, controlled, composed, a little bored. Alexander's hand stayed close to Nell's elbow but did not take over. Lady Beatrice watched like a conductor judging the tempo. "She good. That will suffice." Julian's voice came close to a whisper. "Watch coverage for an hour. If this goes bad, we pull the event." The trustee's threat hung in the air like an unpaid bill. After the gallery, Alexander led Nell to a private library behind the ballroom. The door shut. The world outside became muffled. Nell exhaled a breath that felt much larger inside the small room. Marcus waited near the doorway with a tablet, eyes scanning the media feed. There are a dozen outlets teasing it now. Marcusely frames look controlled. Nell touched the photograph in her locket again and remembered the way the orchestra had stopped when the locket hit the marble earlier. That memory was concrete, the metallic ping, the conductor's baton freezing, the sound of spoons on plates stilling. She had not wanted attention. Now attention attached itself to her like an extra coat she hadn't asked for. She to Alexander, "Why keep that photograph?" Her question was small and practical. He did not look surprised, because some things are private until they are not. He said, "Because I keep reminders that I am human in places I cannot lose them." He laid a single old photograph from his wallet on the library table, face down. Marcus waited a respectful distance. The librarian's clock ticked, ordinary and indifferent. Lady Beatrice found a gap in the doorframe and said through her teeth, "That was risky, Alexander. Understandable, perhaps, but risky. We need assurances." Alexander regarded her and said, "You have them. I will take responsibility." The sentence did not clarify motives. It only shifted obligation onto him. Lady Beatrice's lips tightened and she left. Julian followed with a curt nod. Nell listened to their retreating footsteps and felt a new emotion rise, wary gratitude. She had a protector now who had public power and who had chosen to use it for her in a narrow, costly moment. Gratitude arrived in her hands as a light trimmer. She had not asked for favors. She had asked for the truth to be accepted. Alexander's public step had ensured that. They stood in the library in a strained silence long enough for words to feel both necessary and dangerous. Marcus cleared his throat. "Carrington will be heading back shortly. We requested privacy for Miss Avery." He did not look at Nell when he said it. Marcus' professionalism read as a promise and a warning. Nell folded her fingers around the edge of the table and said, "Thank you, Marcus." The words were simple. Marcus nodded and left without another sentence. Alone with Alexander, Nell realized that the event had created a private problem of its own. How did she behave now that she had been handed provisional protection? She expected an explanation or a performance. Alexander sat down, palms flat on the table, then rubbed his thumb along the rim of his cufflinkior, not expected to do anything. he said finally, but you should know this. The world will read more into tonight than happened. Be prepared, the sentence was not comfort so much as an instruction. Nell felt anger flare. I don't need a tutor in scandal. She said he need privacy when it matters. Alexander's mouth twitched, perhaps a smile, perhaps the ghost of one that demanded. He said ask for it openly. Let them know you will not be manufactured. His voice did not lecture. It offered strategy. His fingers brushed the photograph in his wallet, and then withdrew them quickly. They spoke until the library door opened and Marcus' head popped in. Lady Beatrice insists on a signed statement in 5 minutes. He said Julian wants it worded. Security will escort Miss Avery back to the ballroom. Nell stood. The weight of the locket felt heavy now, not because of the metal, but because of how visible it had made her grief. She folded the pages of a book mechanically and slid it into her clutch. She ill sign. But I will stand by what I say, Alexander. Do you understand? Her voice was tight and clear. He did not answer with words at first. He adjusted his watch and then looked directly at Harry. Understand. I'll be there when you sign. Outside, the crowd continued to shuffle like a restless audience. The camera's light had not dimmed. But inside the library, behind the closed door, Nell felt a small change. The men and women who had judged her at a distance were required, for now, to accept the version she helped shape. The moment did not resolve larger questions about the charity or the trustees, but it resolved the immediate collision of rumor and reputation. A final event arrived. A young tabloid editor poked her head into the library and asked in a tone intended to pry, any chance for an exclusive quote. Marcus, no comment, and closed the door on the editor's face. The click of lock sound made Nell aware of how literal privacy must be defended. She touched the locket once more and felt the photograph inside, a small, private object that had altered public perception. Nell left the library with the statement in hand. She walked down the corridor with Alexander close enough to feel his movement, but he did not speak. At the grand staircase she signed the paper in neat, precise strokes. Marcus kept the door between them and the press. When she finished, Alexander folded the paper, placed it in his jacket, and then laid his cloak over her shoulders again with a deliberate, quiet gesture. The action was small, public enough for the cameras to see, and private enough to mean something different to both of them. The chapter closed on that action, Alexander closing the library door behind them and laying his cloak over Nell's shoulders. It was a visible, concrete beat that altered their standing with the trustees and with each other, and it forced a new problem to the surface, what each of them would now owe for a moment that began with an accidental stumble and ended with a deliberate, risky choice. Emotion root, fear, emotion shifts, fear, suspicion, relief, uncertainty, wary, gratitude. The envelope hit Alexander Carrington's palm before Nell could push through the narrow corridor. Glass doors banged somewhere inside the ballroom. A camera flash burned the plaster and threw Oliver Dyer's face into a hard white ledger. Oliver, spitting the word. Nell heard it as if it landed on her skin. Shame rose in Nell like a quick, hot tide, and she stepped forward, fingers tight on her clutch. She had come to the banquet to finish one speech and close a small foundation pledge. She had not come to be accused in a service corridor. Within 3 sentences the danger was concrete. A ledger page with her family name had appeared, and the accusation could unravel the night and her family's remaining reputation in minutes. Nell's first move was practical. She reached for the envelope with 2 steady steps, but Alexander's hand folded over it first. He angled his body between Oliver and the hallway, jawed tight. Give it to me, Alexander, voice low. Oliver laughed at the command. You want proof? This is proof. Alexander's reply was clippity. Will see it in private. His hand did not shake. Nell watched the motion and felt the second emotion shift, suspicion harden into fear. She remembered the locket slamming against marble earlier, the sound that stopped the orchestra, and the flash on the balcony that had carved a hard line through her night. Those earlier moments were not distant images. They had left a practical trail, cameras, witnesses, a name on paper. Oliver shoved the envelope so that the ledger page slid forward. A thin slip of paper creased and showed handwriting. Nell's fingers tightened on her clutch until the seam dug into her palmavary. One of the servants read aloud without meaning to. Voices leaned. The corridor had its own audience now. Lady Beatrice Marsh's presence became visible before her voice, as a clip of stiff skirts rounded the doorway. Eleanor, Lady Beatrice, once she saw Nell. Blunt and fast explain the command carried the banquet's temperature with it. Nell's cheeks stung. She forced her voice to remain in the present. "Don't know what that is," she said. Marcus Hale, Alexander's aide, appeared behind them and took in the envelope with a glance that catalogued threat. "Hands off until we confirm, Marcus to Oliver." Marcus' words moved the scene into action. Alexander detained the paparazzo, and Marcus scanned the paper, while Nell searched the ledger edge for a name she recognized. The script of the accusation was clear: her family's name, and an entry that suggested funds diverted. Oliver tried to pull back. "This will run by midnight," he said, fingers tapping his phone. "You don't want this to go quiet, Carrington. People will want to know why the Harris family appears beside missing donations." Nell's throat closed around a different taste now: humiliation. The second emotion shift arrived. Fear turned into humiliation as Lady Beatrice and two patrons appeared and demanded answers in voices meant for the ballroom, not the corridor. They wanted a statement. Eleanor Avery, Lady Beatrice, using the full name like an accusation. "Her donors will want to know where their money went." Nell stepped back. She remembered the locket sliding open on the marble floor in the grand hall, and the moment the orchestra stopped for her. The memory was concrete: the small oval tin of metal, the photograph within, the way her heel scraped the marble when she stumbled. That earlier accident had already tightened the evening's attention on her. Now a ledger page amplified scrutiny. "Can find out. I will find out. Nell." Her voice was short. Alexander did not interrupt. He folded his hands and watched her. His eyes were a steady, cool pressure. He did not speak unnecessary things. When he moved, it was to detain Oliver with a professional grip at the elbow. "You will come with me." Alexander Marcus secure the envelope. The dressing room door slammed once behind them. Inside, Lady Beatrice and two patrons pushed a chair under Nell's wrong foot and demanded proof. "Why is your name here?" Lady Beatrice, turning the ledger page so she could point with an extended nail. Nell held her locket between thumb and forefinger, fingers damp where she had touched the metal for comfort earlier. The small photograph inside the locket was only a few centimeters wide, a man's cropped shoulder, a child's handwriting on the back. She had never shown it to anyone. Nell's responses were short: "Tactically manage a small foundation. We use many ledgers. I keep records at home. I can bring them tomorrow." Her words aimed to move the problem out of the rooms. "Here tomorrow won't do." One patron said. "Tonight the papers will print." Marcus stepped forward then. Voice low and practical: "Need to verify chain of custody." He said, "If this is planted, we must show it. If it's real, we need an explanation. Alexander will address this publicly if required." Marcus' phrasing shifted responsibility toward containment. Nell felt both relief and dread. Relief that Alexander might intervene. Dread because any intervention from him would attract attention to her. Nell folded her locket into her palm and found a folded scrap of paper tucked behind the tiny photograph. The initials were written in cramped handwriting. The same initials were visible on the ledger page. Her breath shortened, her hands trembled. This was the mid-chapter mini cliffhanger. She looked at Alexander and could not tell whether his face reflected anger, calculation, or something that moved under his calm, but she saw a faint tension at the crease between his brows. Alexander guided her out of the dressing room with two firm steps. "Stay close," he said. "Oh, not say anything to the press." His command had a double edge. It was protection and a demand. Nell obeyed because she had no other plan, and because her chest still felt the burn of being exposed. Moving through the service corridor, She listened to the hum of the ballroom beyond and felt the spread of the smear as a practical threat. A headline could cost donors, cancel events, and close doors that were already narrow. Outside on the balcony, the city breathed in a colder air. Nell opened the locket again, and this time Alexander did not look away. He moved near the railing and, with a single motion, put a hand on the little oval to steady it in her finger. "Show me," he said. His voice had a low, measured baritone quality that did not match the headlines being whispered below. She angled the locket so he could read the initials. He leaned forward, close enough that she felt the slight cedar and bergamot scent he wore. He read aloud the initials and then looked down at the ledger page in his hand. The emotion shift here was private. Humiliation edged toward incredulity in Nell, while Alexander's suspicion softened into something like concern. He did not speak of rumors. He offered practical protection. "He will not let them ruin you tonight," he said. Nell wanted to say thank you and felt ridiculous for wanting anything at all. Instead, she steadied her voice. "Why would my family's name be there?" She asked. "Did he keep every receipt?" "I keep every letter." Alexander did not immediately answer. He closed his hand around the ledger page and refolded it. When he finally spoke, his words were precise. "Someone wanted to draw you into a story. Ill-find who he did not promise innocence. He promised investigation." Marcus appeared at his elbow, report in hand, and said, "There's online traction. Oliver's post has 10,000 views in 10 minutes. Lady Beatrice has asked for a statement." Nell's chest tightened. 10,000, she said. She could not stop the images of donors stepping back. She could not stop imagining children on the charity list losing support because of one paper slip. The third emotion shift came. Humiliation folded into an urgent resolve to defend her family name. "Then we need to stop it fast," she said. Alexander acted with rare public decisiveness. He returned to the grand hall foyer, walking with Nell at his side in a way that forced staff and patrons to notice them together. At the entrance, whispers mounted into clear sentences. Lady Beatrice issued a statement next to a bank of microphones. Voice steady and cold. "We will investigate," she said. Cameras angled toward Nell like mechanical fists. On the charity stage, someone cleared their throat. The master of ceremonies faltered. Alexander stepped forward and spoke into the microphone before anyone else could shape the narrative. "This ledger entry is not a matter for the press tonight," he said. "It concerns a small part of our donor list. I will take responsibility for clarifying it." His voice carried through the hall. Nell heard patrons murmur. Some chairs moved away. The ledger had become a lever. Alexander's public move shifted the weight. Backstage, Marcus found a photocopy of an old ledger tucked into Alexander's leather wallet. His hands went cold when he flipped it open. The handwriting on the photocopy matched the smear. Alexander's name appeared as a signatory. Marcus those words out loud to Alexander in the private anteroom. "Your name is a signatory here, Marcus." Alexander's face did not change much, but his eyes did something small. They narrowed at the corners as if testing a new fact. The revelation rearranged the power dynamics in the moment. Nell watched from the doorway because she had followed Alexander there, because she needed to know whether he had a secret link to her family. This was the chapter twist that altered how listeners would understand earlier events. Alexander's connection to the ledger suggested a personal tie, not a cold corporate one. Marcus questions rapidly. "When did this happen? Who else has copies? How did Oliver get this now?" He paced with a folder under his arm. Alexander answered without theatrics. "Years ago. It was a short collaboration." He'll explain when appropriate. He folded the photocopy back into his wallet and handed it to Marcus with a careful motion that implied both trust and strategy. Nell felt the room tilt again, but differently now. Shame and humiliation remained, but there was an opening of another feeling. A guarded gratitude toward Alexander for stepping into the line of fire, and a new suspicion that his involvement had reasons beyond simple benevolence. She remembered the small photograph in her locket and a name on the ledger that matched the initials. The pieces fit in a concrete way, a previous ledger, a signature, a private connection. She needed answers, and Alexander had just admitted, in the quiet of an anteroom, to a past that involved the ledger's handwriting. Back in the main hall, Alexander walked onto the stage with the poise of someone who had rehearsed control. He did not read a prepared speech. Instead, he spoke quickly, directly, and with a choice that broke his usual wall. He took responsibility in front of the assembled guests. The entry circulating tonight is mine. He said he will explain the context and the accounting. For now, I accept responsibility for the appearance of my name. There was a pause, like a held breath measured by the chandeliers. Lady Beatrice's face did not change, but several patrons whispered in the tiers. Alexander's admission was an immediate public sacrifice that opened a new front. By naming himself, he forced a narrative shift away from Nell and toward him. The act cost him something: visible attention, questions about motives, possible damage to reputation, but it bought Nell a fragile, immediate reprieve. Nell's reaction was immediate and physical. She felt her knees go soft, and she steadied herself against the stage railing. No one had asked her consent before he spoke. She heard someone call her name, a low, half-uttered thing. Nelson's humiliation had been interrupted by relief, then by a tight fear of the unknown. The ledger remained in play. The social accounting of responsibility had been rearranged. After Alexander's statement, cameras swarmed the stage edges and then moved in through the foyer. Oliver's online post ballooned into headlines. Lady Beatrice issued a reserved public comment that maintained "I appreciate Mr. Carrington's willingness to clarify," she said. The words were careful. They did not exonerate. The smear had become a story about Alexander's past and its present consequences. Marcus, Alexander, and 2 charity staffers huddled by the side wing. Their whispers were sharp. "If this connects to his signatory role," one staffer said, "we need ledgers, emails. Anything that proves the entry was accounted for." Alexander agreed in short lines. "Get counsel. Pull the foundation's records. Contact our auditors." The orders were practical, administrative, the shape of someone trying to close a leak. Nell left the crush of guests and found the grand piano, its lid closed, keys concealed. The room had emptied to a hush that felt like the moment after applause when the band takes a breath. She set her clutch on the piano and took the locket into both hands, turning the tiny photograph until the light hit it. Alexander joined her at the piano, a half step behind. He did not ask for the locket. He simply stood near enough to be present. "You were right to hide this. Alexander, some things belong to you. I should not have pulled the headline toward you." His voice was low. Nell listened and registered that he admitted a misstep. The admission moved her toward a new emotional place, guarded trust tentatively forming after humiliation and public exposure. "Why did your name happen to be on that ledger?" she asked, direct, because the ledger's photocopy had changed what she could ask for. Alexander's fingers found the cufflink at his wrist, and he adjusted it, a small mannerism that conveyed thought years back. He said there was a short arrangement when the foundation helped a community program. "My signature appears because I endorsed the partnership. I never expected this to resurface." He did not offer a longer explanation. Marcus returned with a sealed envelope and a photocopy of correspondence. "C. Have emails showing transfers went to the charity account, Marcus." He pushed the papers across the piano towards Nell, so she could see everything but the smear. "Used a handwritten ledger that matches an old copy of a book Mr. Carrington kept. We need to reconstruct the chain." Nell read the emails quickly. They were dated years earlier, with account numbers and transaction lines. The electronic records matched transfers described in the ledger. The concrete documents reduced the abstract accusation to administrative mismatches. But Oliver's post had already turned the ledger into a scandal in the eyes of donors who saw only a single image and a headline. The threat to the evening remained practical. Donors could call off support, events could be cancelled, and reputations could be punctured by a photo. Lady Beatrice approached again, this time quieter. "Carrington, Miss Avery," she said, "given your statement, we will delay any formal press release until counsel reviews the documents. I expect full cooperation." Her tone still carried judgment, but the immediate public pressure eased. Nell felt the relief like a cool hand on a fevered spot. She met Alexander's eyes, and the two of them shared a look without words. There was a small, private exchange of accountability. He had stepped into the line of fire to protect her. She owed him questions about why his name had been linked to her family. The ledger had revealed a hidden tie and forced both of them into choices that would change their standing in the room and possibly beyond. They stayed by the piano until the kitchen staff began to clear plates, and the last of the guests trickled out. Alexander's decision to speak publicly had bought them time but not answers. Marcus promised a forensic audit first thing in the morning will follow every paper trail. He said, "If anyone planted this, we will find them. If the records show otherwise, well, disclose them properly." Nell closed the locket and pressed the tiny photograph flat between her fingers. She had shifted through suspicion, fear, humiliation, and now toward a practical determination to protect the truth. The evening's events had not resolved the ledger's meaning, but Alexander's choice on stage had changed who would carry the immediate weight. That public sacrifice had cost him attention and possibly reputation. It had given Nell the breathing room to assemble her documents and to demand fuller answers. A staff member approached with a tired, professional face and whispered that a solicitor had arrived asking to speak with Alexander. Marcus motioned for security. Alexander nodded once and then looked back at Nell. "Will be offline for a bit. He said he will not let them use you as a target." Nell swallowed. "Thank you," she said. Short and direct. She felt gratitude, but she also felt the need to know more about the name in his wallet. "Please, tell me when you can explain the signatory." She did not ask for a full confession. She asked for a time and an explanation. Alexander's hand touched the piano lid as if anchoring himself. "He will tell you everything I can when privacy permits," he said. "Tonight, we gather facts. Tomorrow, we lay them out." His tone was measured. He turned and walked toward the waiting solicitor with Marcus at his elbow. Nell remained by the piano until the hall quieted to an echo. She slid the locket back into her clutch. The ledger had not been cleared, but the smear's immediate effect had been constrained by Alexander's intervention. That intervention cost him something visible, and may have opened new questions about his past ties to her family. The night ended with a concrete event that would shape the next day. A solicitor's footsteps in the foyer and Alexander leaving the hall with Marcus and a folder under his arm. She left the piano and moved through the back corridors toward the cloakroom, aware that the ledger's image would not disappear by dawn. She had a stack of receipts at home and a list of donors. She planned to bring them to Marcus and the auditors personally. The chapter closed on a practical, situational beat. Alexander's car flashed its lights outside the service door as he prepared to leave with counsel, and Nell watched him go while clutching the locket that now linked them both more tightly to a shared problem. The final sound that carried after the last guest left was the distant tapping of a phone in Oliver Dyer's hand as he refreshed his feed. His post had shifted the night, but the public narrative was now split between a smear and a public admission. Nell's shame had become a series of actions. She would gather records, answer questions, and push for clarity. Alexander's sacrifice had altered perceptions and bought her time. Outside, the valet closed Alexander's car door and the engine purred. Inside, Nell folded her hands over her clutch and prepared for daylight inquiries that would demand documents, voices, and corroborations. The piano lid remained closed in the darkened hall. The ledger lay in a folder that Marcus carried away. The locket was a small, private object in Nell's palm. The immediate conflict of the chapter was resolved in a single public act, Alexander taking responsibility, but the ledger's true origin and motive remained open. Before she left, Nell tucked the locket beneath her dress and walked toward the service exit where Alexander's car idled. A stagehand paused and asked if she needed a ride. She refused, choosing instead to walk home with the knowledge that tomorrow would demand papers, conversations, and a clearer account. Emotion route, shame emotion shifts. The reporter slammed the ledger under Eleanor Nell Avery's hand and demanded, "Is your family buying silence?" Fear pushed cold sweat up the back of Nell's neck before she could form a reply. She pressed her fingers to the locket at her throat as if it could hold the answer there, and cameras angled already from the end of the service corridor. Concrete stakes were raw and present. If the ledger attached her name to hush money transfers, the charity would collapse tonight, and Alexander Carrington would be dragged into the ruin with her. Nell did not wait to be told who she was on camera. She stepped back, heels clicking on the tile, and held the ledger up by its corner so the fluorescent light would glare off the plastic sleeve. "This is not my ledger," she said, voice steady though her hands trembled. "Claire, you can't print that without proof." The journalist, Claire Montfort, shoved a microphone toward her face. "Nell Avery, did your family transfer funds to silence complaints?" Claire's words cut across the corridor. A security guard's radio fizzed. Around them, staff and a half-formed press cluster moved like a current, carrying perfumes, cufflinks, and the rustle of papers. Nell's fear widened into a precise worry, shame. She could survive scandal if she kept the facts clear, but the ledger spoke in numbers and names and would change how Lady Evelyn Harrington and donors viewed the charity's work. She could feel shame settling into her chest, hot, practical, the kind that made you pull your shoulders tight and speak less. That shame would shape every choice she made in the next hour. She thought of the afternoon earlier, of the hem catching and the locket flipping open against the marble in the middle of the ballroom. She felt again the metallic ring of the pendant and the sick flare when the orchestra stopped. The camera flash on the balcony had already made her a readable image once tonight. Now someone else wanted to make her a headliner. "Nell, you should let us help," a voice said behind her. Alexander Carrington moved through the staff like a wedge of dark fabric, his bespoke jacket untouched by the crowd. He used his name as a shield as he stepped to her side, placing a hand lightly against her elbow. "Alexander, please, Nell." She did not ask that he stop the cameras. She asked for a pause long enough to think. She felt him fold his fingers over hers for a second that was both protective and a little possessive. He did not speak at first. His jaw tightened in the way she had seen before. The expression drew a thin crease between his brows. Claire took the open reaction as an invitation. "Carrington, will you comment on transfers tied to Lady Harrington's accounts?" Alexander's voice Dropiti will not answer speculations in a service corridor. "Claire, this is harassment." He angled his body toward the reporter and used a single economic sentence that rerouted the attention. An efficient move. Practiced in boardrooms. "They will ask till you say something." Alexander, Lady Evelyn Harrington, when she arrived, gliding into the corridor in a pale cloak that skimmed tile. Her voice was calm but wired. "He cannot have this leak." Nell listened for the next 5 sentences, like a woman measuring the width of a shelf before placing a heavy vase. The immediate problem was concrete: an envelope, a ledger, Oliver Dyer's name scribbled in the margin, and the cameras already whispered in their lenses. She had to choose whether to let Alexander protect her with silence, or to take the risk of a public truth that would reshape who looked guilty. They moved her away from the cluster into the kitchen corridor, where hot air and the clatter of staff made a new, harsh soundtrack. Marcus Reed, Alexander's legal advisor, arrived and began to list options: a quiet settlement to suppress the ledger, a countersuit, a public denial framed by documents. He spoke in steps and contingencies. His sentences had the rhythm of someone folding a map. Nell listened and felt a second emotional shift take her. Doubt. Doubt threaded through the fear and shame. Doubt that silence would keep the charity intact. Doubt that Alexander's careful life could survive the disclosure without damage. Doubt that she could let others decide for her. She touched the locket again, embarrassed by the gesture but unable to stop or can buy time. Marcus get a statement from Lady Evelyn. We push the cameras back, and we negotiate with Dyer. We keep the ledger out of print, he spoke, as though transactions alone could repair people. Nell had already watched transactions erase people tonight. She remembered the envelope pushing into Alexander's palm earlier in the evening and Oliver's face a sharp white in the ballroom. She remembered the way Oliver spat the word ledger as if it could bruise the air. Memory was specific here, the smell of polish on the marble, the sound of a dropped fork in an interrupted dinner. Those were the facts she could hold. No, Nell, and the single word cut across legal plans like a blade. She saw the ripple of surprise, and then irritation from the older men in the room. Nell, Lady Evelyn. Close enough now that Nell could see the tiny tremor in her fingers. Can handle this quietly. You'd save everyone a scandal. Lady Evelyn's voice wanted to soothe and to steer. If we handle it quietly, Oliver Dyer decides who stays quiet, Nell replied. She worked to keep her sentences short and clear. Found a piece of paper in the locket this afternoon. It wasn't a payment sheet. It was a note about the children's quarantines, notes my mother would have kept. I can show you. Alexander's eyes hardened with something like calculation, and for an instant Nell wondered whose life he would choose. His reputation or the woman who had bent a moment of his reserve into kindness. That was the second emotional shift. For him, she felt through his posture, his usual calm curdled into something protective. Show me, Marcus. He had been waiting for a place to land his logic, and now seized it. They led her up a service stair, and out onto the balcony where the city breathed blue, and the air smelled of tire smoke and distant traffic. Oliver Dyer watched from the steps below with the gaunt, furious set of a man who believes he holds a final card. He circled the group like a dog that will not yet bite. Nell unfastened the locket. The metal felt warm from her skin. Inside, a narrow strip of paper folded small and precise. She flattened it on the railing. The balcony's lamp cut across the handwriting. There were dates, times, names, and a line that read, "Supply log, medical donations accounted." Quarantines cleared. The handwriting matched the notes she had seen in her mother's ledger, neat and careful. Oliver's mouth curled. That strip doesn't stop the ledger. You know that, Nell? The ledger ties names to transfers. It names the accounts. That strip only shows intent. The press cluster stirred below. Claire's camera shutter kept time. She called out, "Nell, can you confirm the family note ties you to the accounts?" Nell moved her whole body forward. 2 beats of voice. "Steady, me name is on our accounts as an administrator. She said he can explain what each line means. But if Oliver Dyer prints only the figures, he'll make a story that hides the notes." Alexander stepped in and lowered his voice, so only she could hear. "If you let me handle this, we can bury the ledger without damaging the charity's programs," he said. His baritone held an edge that did not easily give. Nell swallowed. This was no longer only about her. She felt the emotional axis pivot again from doubt back into agency and empowerment that showed in small, concrete moves. She did not make a speech. She packed the paper back into the locket, closed it, and slipped the chain under her dress. An hour later they returned to the private sitting room off the ballroom, because the matter required discretion, and because Lady Evelyn insisted on a quiet solution. Marcus outlined a settlement with the economy of a man who sees problems as contracts. Oliver Dyer arrived by appointment and carried a thin, practiced smile that had all the edges of a threat to entertain offers. Oliver don't take charity statements seriously. When money moves, he set a single sheet of paper on the table and tapped it. The tap was a metronome of menace. "Offer what you want, Lady Evelyn. Hands still, but I will not have the charity destroyed over lies." Oliver's eyes flicked to Nell's. This ledger shows transfers to shell accounts. The paper trail is clear. You can sign away liability and well suppress it for a price." Otherwise, I go public. Nell watched faces. Alexander's jaw went tight enough to show the faint scar along his jawline. Marcus opened his mouth and then closed it. Lady Evelyn's fingers tightened around her glass. Dyer expected the bargain to happen like a clockwork exchange, money for silence, covenant for safety. The room smelled of old wood, expensive perfume, and the faint bitter tang of coffee left too long. Nell felt a shift inside that was not the earlier fear but a hardening into refusal. That was another emotional move. The fear had become anger. Anger did what words did not. It pushed her to act. No. She said he will not sign away truth to keep someone quiet. The room made the small pause of people recalculating. Nell. Lady Evelyn began. No. Nell again. Oliver wants to make me look guilty because he can sell the story. I have a document that shows intent and accounting notes. If you want to keep the charity intact, we should release the notes and show the full context. Not pay to hide it. Oliver laughed, a sound that Scrappy'd go public. You'd risk everything on a locket. Nell's lips pressed together. She fixated on the locket under her dress the way a violinist keeps eyes on the bow. I've been in rooms where transactions erase people. She said he won't let my mother's work be erased by someone selling a lie. Marcus leaned forward. I can craft a narrative that frames this as administrative error and confirm your statements. We can keep donors calm. He was still seeking the route with least noise. Alexander stepped closer to the table. You can do it her way. He said you release supporting documents that show the ledgers and entries are out of context. We show intent. We do it tonight, before he prints anything. Oliver pounced on the word tonight. Show me the documents, Mr. Carrington. If you go public, you give me a target. The exchange accelerated. 3 men argued over positions and legal exposure. Lady Evelyn tried to guide them back to discretion. The tension rose and fell like a tide with quick, hard eddies. Outside, someone shouted. The staff corridor's bustle had become a chorus of flashbulbs. Security radio stuttered and a muffled scuffle slid through the door. Oliver's patience broke. He stood and reached for Nell's hand. His gesture was rough and sudden, a man hoping to reclaim leverage by force. He moved with the confidence of someone used to getting his way. Nell did not yield. She pulled back from his grip, and the action made the room snap into alert. Alexander's face changed in that instant. The controlled man replaced by someone who stepped forward without hesitation. Let go of her, Alexander. Words that carried weight don't always need to be loud. Marcus drew closer, and security moved in a single practiced motion. The movement turned awkward into physical. Oliver lunged to snatch the locket. Nell twisted. The chain tightened and threatened to tear. A chair scraped. A security man intercepted with a hand to Oliver's chest. Cameras below caught the first real physical contact of the night and raised their lenses. Claire shouted, "Hold on, are you all right?" Nell's breath came in short, sharp pulls. She felt the locket move against her sternum like something that could be lost in a hand. That was the small cliffhanger mid-chapter. Would Oliver take the locket, and with it, the one piece of evidence that could clear her name? Alexander reached past security, his cufflink catching the light as he moved. He seized Oliver by the wrist with a grip that had both calculation and force. "You will let go of her now, Oliver," he said. Oliver spat a word that landed somewhere between threat and defiance. "You can't make me disappear." Carrington, no, Alexander, he can't make you disappear. "But I can make sure you answer for false claims." Security pulled Oliver away enough to separate him from Nell. They cuffed his arms together with a rough efficiency. He glared at Alexander as if vows and contracts were swords to be crossed. Claire shouted questions into her phone, and someone called for the police. The crisis forced decisions. Marcus and Lady Evelyn quickly scanned the room and decided to present evidence rather than negotiate with extortion. Lady Evelyn produced a sealed folder and laid out account statements that corroborated the notes Nell had shown on the balcony. The paperwork was bureaucratic: dates, wire references, receipts for medical supplies, signatures. It was everything the ledger could obscure if presented side by side. Oliver's facade faltered when the records were read under the lamp. Lady Evelyn Reed allowed the quarantines cleared and the supply disbursements. Claire stopped shouting and trained a camera on the papers. The crowd below shifted. The ledger, suddenly alone, saturated with accusation, looked thin. Alexander stepped into the floodlights on the grand steps and made a decision that changed the night's tenor. He moved forward so that the cameras must focus on him instead of Nell. He spoke before Marcus or the lawyers could arrange a statement. "Listen to me," he said, and his voice cut into the microphones. "Staticy accept responsibility for the accounts that I oversee. I will cooperate with any inquiry, but I will not allow a private person's name to be used as a bargaining chip." The confession was partial and economical. He did not explain the whole truth. He framed responsibility in a way that deflected heat away from Nell while accepting enough blame to shift public attention onto him. The crowd below him lunged for a reaction. Flashbulbs popped like distant thunder. "Carrington Claire, moving closer for a live feed. Will you confirm there were transfers linked to your operations?" Alexander held the microphone and counted words like a man weighing coins. "There were transfers. I will not hide that. But the context being presented tonight is incomplete. I will provide full records as necessary." Oliver's voice rose then. Thin as a wiry, he protects his own by lying about mine before the argument could sharpen into a live slander. Lady Evelyn slid forward with the corroborating folder and placed it on the steps where the lights hit the pages. She read a single line into a microphone. The ledger's figures matched disbursements, but notes and beneficiary records tied those figures to public programs and emergency medical supplies. There was a moment when the cameras did not know where to point. The ledger had claimed guilt by numbers, but the new documents rewove the figures into a narrative that made Dyer's accusations seem like a misdirection. Police arrived to separate Oliver and question him about attempted coercion. Security led him away under arrest while shouts of indignation and a few scattered supporters trailed. Marcus orchestrated the immediate release of statements and verified documents. The press pack reoriented and started asking new questions about motive. Nell felt the night's final weight change beneath her feet. The fear was still there, but it was braced now by exhaustion and an odd relief. The shame that had first gnawed at her had been confronted directly. Whether the public would accept the explanation would be decided in the days ahead. For the moment, the ledger had been unmasked as part of a dirty playbook. They returned inside as the hotel staff began to sweep the steps. The ballroom had emptied into small clusters of guests whispering in expensive coats. A dimmed grand piano sat under low light at the edge of the room, its lid closed. Alexander and Nell drifted toward it as the crowd thinned, Marcus and Lady Evelyn busy with press statements, and security still processing Oliver's removal. Nell sat on the piano bench without thought, hands in her lap. Alexander stood a small step away, the city light catching the silver at his temples. He did not stand like a man expecting congratulations. He stood like a man who had surrendered a piece of the life he had spent curating. "You didn't have to do that, Alexander." "Nell." He watched her without answering at first. Then he crossed the small distance and set the locket on the piano between them. It was a precise motion, neither an offering nor a claim, but a parceling of what remained. "Needy did it to stop him taking the thing that mattered to you," he said. His voice was low. "He did it because he tried to make you small to get his price." Nell reached and touched the locket. Her fingers brushed his knuckles. She felt a small, regulated warmth. She looked up and saw the faint crease between his brows, the scar along his jaw. He had not said that he wanted to change his life. He had said only that he wanted her safe. She folded the locket into her hand and closed her fingers. "Thank you," she said, "but this is not about me being made small. It's about whether people can lie and sell it." Alexander's mouth tilted. He took a breath and then, without fanfare, he made a visible gesture. He reached and removed his cufflink. The small antique gold piece flashed, and he set it on the piano next to the locket. The motion held significance in the room, a symbol of small, private giving rather than public posture. They sat in silence that was not empty. It was a quiet produced by a chain of events: the press ambush, the bargaining, Oliver's turn to force, Alexander's decision, Lady Evelyn's records. Each had been a choice with immediate consequences. The hotel's cleaning staff moved chairs in the distance. Someone closed a heavy curtain. Nell felt another small shift, this time toward tiredness and something like fragile hope. She did not let herself call it a beginning. She described the feeling instead as a choice to stand after a fall. Alexander looked at her directly. "There will be questions tomorrow, I know." She said, "Well, answer them with the papers." He nodded. "One send. If they try to make you pay for their lies again, I'll stand in front of it." Nell considered the sentence. It was not a promise of forever. It was a precise, present offer, a body in front of a problem. She accepted it with a nod small enough to be private. They left the piano area together. Lady Evelyn lingered to give them a nod that had both gratitude and calculation. Marcus moved to shepherd them, statements to finalize, press releases to approve. The night's work was not over. It had only shifted from immediate crisis to damage control. Outside on the steps, the last photographers packed away lenses, and security inspected their reports. Oliver sat in a holding room, roaring about conspiracies and lies. The police took his statement and took down facts. The charities board would meet in the morning. Before they separated, Alexander reached for the locket again. He did not take it. He pressed his palm against the top of Nell's hand and then let it rest there for a second. The touch was not a declaration, it was attendance. Nell opened her fingers and looked at him. "Stay for the debrief, Marcus." She glanced at Alexander. He straightened his shoulder-sill. "Stay for a bit," he said. They walked back into the small cluster of aids, papers, and low-voiced plans. The scandal had been contained, not erased. The ledger still existed, as had Oliver's attempt at extortion. But the night's sharpest choice, Alexander stepping into the light and reframing the ledger's meaning, had changed how the public would see the story in its first telling. They would have to fight later with proofs, board minutes, bank statements, and schedules. They would speak to donors and to the press. They would correct the record in slow, precise motions. But those were tasks of process rather than panic. Nell kept one hand on the locket as they moved. The other hand slid into her pocket and closed around the worn page that had begun this argument, the medical notes folded to fit a small jewel. She thought of her mother and the ledger pages in a filing cabinet back home. The memory she referenced was concrete. The afternoon her mother counted supplies and wrote recipient names in a ledger, writing with a fountain pen that left a smudge when she pressed too hard. That memory had been the evidence she used tonight. They reached the private office backstage, where the lights had been dimmed to a functional amber. Alexander stopped and faced her. He did not make a speech. He handed the cufflink back to her and said, "You keep the locket." "I keep the cufflink." Nell smiled, a small, clear thing. She fastened the cufflink back into a silk-lined box on the desk and slid the locket under her dress again. It felt right. Outside, dawn began to lift its edges along the London skyline. The charity had weathered an attempt to weaponize a ledger. Oliver Dyer would be processed and his claims tested. The club would meet in the morning and donors would demand specifics. Alexander's reputation had been dented by his partial admission, but his action had also turned cameras away from Nell. As the chapter closed, events spun outward into the tasks that would follow: statements to craft, legal filings to prepare, donors to reassure. The evening's immediate threat had been resolved by documents and by Alexander's choice to step forward. And the final concrete beat of the night was the piano bench where Nell closed the locket and felt Alexander's hand rest briefly in hers before he turned toward the cluster of aids and the first draft of a press release. The room had narrowed to two measured hands, a locket and a cufflink. The rest, the hearings, the board, the headlines would follow. For now, on the grand steps and under the low light, Nell let the breath leave her and focused on the next concrete step: meet with Marcus at 8. Prepare the file and read the public statements before they went live. She rose from the bench and walked with Alexander toward the waiting world of paperwork and questions.